to How to Deal When the Shit Gets Real podcast. I'm Rietta, and today I'm here with Coach Mak. So, Coach Mak, how do you deal when the shit gets real? Or just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Ooh, like any person that is riddled with anxiety, I have a habit and history of deep introspection. So when the shit gets real, I go to my mind and I think and I strategize and I collect data. But now, of course, as a full-time anxiety coach, how I think, act, interact with my thinking is so much more advantageous than what it used to be. But of course, I move into the old habits occasionally. So when the shit gets real, I start thinking, and I start thinking pretty hard and fast. But yeah, hello everyone. My name is Mac, and I am a anxiety coach, and I am on a mission, a very passionate mission to change how we are thinking, feeling, acting, and reacting to our anxiety. And so that is my bread, my butter, my passion, my elixir, and that is what I do and what I connect with folks about. And that's what I'm excited to connect about today.
Do you think 10 years ago you would have, if you thought you were going to be an anxiety coach, would have been one of those things where you're like, get out of here?
I thought I was going to be in a psychiatric ward. I am not just saying that. I legitimately thought I was going to be like not interacting with the outside world. So yes, this is beyond. And of course I can laugh about it now. Like I can really find a lot of humor and grace, and oh my gosh, I have to, when comparing my current psychological reality compared to what it used to be. But yeah, 10 years ago, I didn't know what the heck was going on in my body, why it was going on, why it was continuing to go on, let alone fast forward to where I'm at today, where I'm like, oh, I get it. No, I really get it. And now I get to help people full time with it. It's, I don't know. It's sobering. It's shocking. It's weird. It's lovely. It's uncomfortable. It's celebratory, and it's everything in between.
Talk about coming full circle.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a full circle for sure. Yeah. I mean, even not even 10 years ago. I mean, truly, 5 years ago, I remember I was calling places where I was living in Pennsylvania at the time, in South Central Pennsylvania, and I was calling local inpatient care facility units, which I wasn't even familiar with. That wasn't a resource I had explored before. And I started, calling for desperate help. So even just 5 years ago, I mean, I was in a very different place in my mind and in my body. And it feels very good to be where I'm at now. I mean, let's keep today. Today's good. We don't, I'm happy with today. So it is beyond full circle.
There you go. I love it. And you did, I have to say, you mentioned in your pre-interview that you literally felt like you lost your mind overnight. I remember reading that going, oh my goodness, like she's got to be exaggerating. But then you kept elaborating and I'm like, I don't think she's exaggerating. So what the heck happened?
Yeah, no, I was not exaggerating. The whole, it's interesting because I had anxiety symptoms for as long as I can remember. Now, of course, when I was little, I didn't have the words for it. It's not like I was a little girl walking around being like, I have anxiety. Like, no, I mean, I had a sensory experience running through my body at all times, mixed with other sensory experiences and just having the sensory experience of being a human, and it's all muddled, right? So, but I was aware. I was aware that I was feeling sensations that others around me, I just didn't feel like they were feeling as often. And now, of course, that was my perception, but I could just tell, right? Like I had certain behaviorisms or actions or tendencies that I noticed, maybe my sibling didn't have, or other friends weren't having. So I knew something was like a little going on. Didn't have the words for it, but fast forward to my early 20s, and that's where things got really interesting because truly, truly overnight, my psychological reality changed really rapidly. I had panic come knocking on my door. Now, beforehand, I had never known what panic was. I mean, socially, colloquially, in society, we hear the word panic often, like, oh, she's panicking. She has her exam tomorrow. She's really nervous. Or, oh shit, where's the car keys? I gotta go. I gotta drive to work. Like I'm running late. I'm panicking. Panic tends to be this word that is used to really often describe someone just momentarily feeling really stressed and kind of freaking out. But panic, from a nervous system perspective, like authentic, deep-rooted panic, is so much more than just mildly freaking out or having, a high level of stress. So the point of me giving that, that disclaimer is that when true, authentic, deep rooted nervous system panic started happening in my body, I was so naive. I mean, I had no idea what was going on. Uh, I had no words for it. I thought I was going absolutely insane. And I actually spent my whole first year of experiencing panic, thinking it was just my brain being damaged, or maybe I had I was thinking like, oh my gosh, do I have a tumor in my head? Is something seriously going wrong? Do I have some viral infection going on in my brain? I mean, I thought about everything you can imagine, because the whole reality changing overnight, it truly did. I was walking outside my house. I remember this was in Salt Lake City, Utah. I was going to the University of Utah, and I liked the apartment I was staying in. I had no bad memories there. I felt safe there. Everything was fine, with my home setting and domestic situation. But I remember going for a walk one night, and when I got back to the house, I was standing about 15 feet from the house, starting to walk inside, and I looked up and something clicked, and I just felt like I could not step into my home. It was like I had cement, bricks tied to my feet. And I just felt absolute terror run through my whole body. And so from there on, I pretty much spent a whole year in terror just about every day. Every minute I woke up, I was in terror. All the way to when I would go to bed, I felt in terror. I felt it when I was in the shower, when I was sitting on the toilet, when I was going for a walk, when I was eating a meal. I mean, it was non-stop. And that's what makes my experience such an overnight experience, because unlike other people that can get panic attacks for the first time, oftentimes when panic arrives in people's life, the panic attack happens, but then it goes away. And then maybe it'll show back up 5 months later, or, a few weeks later. Now, the actual attack part, I only had experience briefly, but the sensation of terror running through my system never stopped. So yes, it did change overnight, and that is not an over exaggeration. So
Yeah, I mean, I hate to make a TV reference, but I mean, The Sopranos actually did a really good job showing how Tony all of a sudden like started having panic attacks, and it's exactly what you said. Like it happened, and then he was okay, and then like a month later he had another one, and he's like, "What is happening to me?"
yeah, so I haven't seen that show, but now that you're saying that, now I'm definitely going to try to go and take a peek and reference it. And I'm not the only, I want to say, I'm not the only one that has experienced all of a sudden overnight getting panic, and then you're just riddled in terror and fear nonstop every day. But my situation is not the normal, not the most common out of, the landscape of panic. So, I mean, oh my gosh, everything changed. I mean, even my vision was starting to get blurred. My audio, sensory experience in my ears. I mean, every part of my body was just affected. It was, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it changed my life overnight, for that time being. So yeah, fast forward to now, I never thought
Yeah.
I'd be sitting and having a call with someone being like, hey, I lost my mind overnight. You want to, you want to chat about it?
So obviously, I know functioning probably isn't the proper word for what you were going through, but how were you attempting to function while you were just in this terror state all the time?
I'm so sad to say this, because I feel sad for the younger version of me. And I also feel extra sad because I know that there's thousands of people out there around the world that are experiencing this right now. And I used to think I was the only one. And now that I'm saying that, that just sounds so self-conceited to be like, I'm the only one going through this. But I didn't know everyone, so many people were also going through this. But isolation is a big thing that happens. And it happened to me because I was this young adult prospering, the future was ahead of me. I was a bright gal. I was going to college, pursuing multiple degrees, had a healthy lifestyle, had lots of career options ahead of me. I had the world ahead of me, and I was building my availability to participate in the world like how I wanted to. And so if your psychological reality changes overnight, how do you just say that to your family? Like, how do you really say that? Uh, and how do you say that without sounding, quote, crazy, but you also actually are starting to feel, quote, crazy, right? So it's this completely weird highly, highly, uncomfortable. There's not even a word to express the level of discomfort, right? This massively discomforting tension. And what do you do when you don't have something figured out? You try to wait till you figure it out. But the issue is that panic for most people and anxiety in general is really difficult for people to figure out naturally and on their own. And so they end up spending years, decades stacked on decades in isolation, whether that's isolation in their mind, physical isolation, starting to separate themselves till they get it figured out and, kind of hide what's going on. And that's what I did too. I totally kept it quiet to myself. I was, in contact with my family. I lived with my family. I was still going to college. I was engaging with people every day, but you can be socially not isolated, yet mentally very isolated. And that's where anxiety gets, yeah, it gets really tricky with that. Because things
I
worsen
just can't
when you're isolated.
I just can't imagine even being able to do all of like the normal things, being terrified all the time, getting out of bed, going to class, showering. Like, was that just super hard to do every day because you just felt so overwhelmed?
Oh, I mean, hard. Yeah, I wish there was some word, but there's just no word for like how hard. And I don't mean in this like, oh, everything was so hard for me, woe is me kind of way. But I mean, just shit was hard. I mean, hey, the name of this podcast, right? Shit gets real. Shit got real. I mean, to give you an example, right? And I'm not kidding you when I say it was every second, especially for my first year experiencing panic. I even remember I would be in my family's home and I would be walking on my bedroom and I would just simply be walking down the hallway, the same hallway I've walked in through a lot of my childhood to go, I was going upstairs to grab a water, do a regular day-to-day task. And I just remember the hallway looking like it was almost shaking. And I just everywhere I looked, I just felt terror in my body. But yet I had to go upstairs and get a glass of water and not say it out loud. If you say that out loud, what is someone going to do? Well, what is someone going to think, right? And not even out of fear of judgment, but I knew that no one could do anything. At least that's what I thought. I knew that, I didn't, what was my mom going to do? What was my dad going to do? I had loving family members, but what were they going to do? What was anyone going to do, right? So that's part of the isolation piece. And so many anxiety sufferers don't know what they're going to do, don't know what other people are going to do, and therefore don't think anything can be done half the time. So they just isolate more and more and more, whether socially or in their mind. And I totally did the same thing. I even moved to isolated communities. I was living in Eastern Oregon for a while, in a very small rural town. I was living on a mountain, working and still functioning and, doing things. But now that I'm older, I see what was happening. I was isolating. I was going through the isolation cycle.
So when was that moment that you did finally tell somebody that you were like, I can't do this anymore?
I don't remember when it was, but I do have some memory. I don't remember the who or the what or the when, but I do have some memories that definitely pop out. And this was a serious uh when shit gets real moment. And this one in particular comes to mind when thinking about my beginning phases of starting to talk outwardly to people. And this is a big part of my story of why I do what I do now. Is I was in graduate school. This was over at the University of Oregon at the time. At this point, I'm in my early mid 20s, or I guess maybe the mid 20s. And I remember I started finally seeing some mental health practitioners and therapists for help with my anxiety. And I think at that point, I somehow found out that maybe what I was experiencing was called panic. And I remember sitting in, this was probably my second or maybe third practitioner that I had, started conversing with and collaborating with. And I remember sitting there in his office, and he was a nice guy, well-intended, like most other therapists and mental health practitioners. And I remember he took a deep breath, and because I had just said to him, is this permanent? I feel like my brain is damaged. I mean, what is going on? I'm so scared. I am so scared. What is happening to my life? What is happening to my brain? What is happening to my psychological reality? I'm losing myself. I'm losing myself. And he took a deep breath, leaned forward, looked me straight in the eye, and he said, these aren't his exact words. I mean, this was many years ago, but he said, essentially, I'm going to be honest with you because I kind of want to make sure your expectations are set accordingly. You're probably going to have this for forever. Anyone that has come before you hasn't gotten much better. And I just remember, I don't think I've ever been, I thought I was terrified before getting in his office. I don't think I've ever been more terrified in my life because to have been feeling like you've been losing your mind every day for a whole year, finally start seeing help or seeking help, and then to be told, this is probably going to be your forever. There was no worse news than that. I mean, at that point, because what do you do from there, right? You have a mental health
Mm-hmm.
authority who's well-intended, well-educated, and they're saying that. It's like, well, where do you go from there, right?
Yeah.
And if
So
there's
we're
anyone else listening that has a similar experience of any kind, whether that be panic or any other facet of your mental health, it's no wonder, you've had hiccups and hurdles on trying to get yourself to go where you want to go and to get there with more ease and automation and in flow and natural progression. And yeah, it's difficult.
so where did you go next?
I didn't stand for that answer. Now, I didn't say that to him. And I don't
Of
even think
course.
that is what was happening in that moment. But I knew there was just like 1% of me, like the tiniest bit of intuition that said, that cannot possibly be correct because you didn't used to be this way. And if you didn't used to be this way, maybe, just maybe, this can be reversed. Maybe this isn't the end all be all. And also, that's not the case for all things in life. Sometimes when things change, they really have changed for the permanent. But this, I just knew, my intuition knew. And we naturally know, we all have this intuition that there is so much more possibility in how our body can perform and the capacity for change. So I hung on. I hung on to that super, super brittle. That thread felt brittle. It was a very brittle thread, but I still felt it and I hung on to it. And at times that 1% turned into a 0.001%. But even in those moments,
Mm-hmm.
I really hung on to that for years and continued to explore and expand and just not give up. Because the moment you really give up, it's even harder to rebound.
Yeah. I mean, if you give up on you, what's left?
Yeah. Yeah. And and to that point, right, is we are always going to be our biggest advocates for our mental health. It does not matter how loving your husband is. It does not matter how loving your mother, your grandmother, your sister, your daughter, your pet poodle, your neighbor. It's no matter how much love and support you may or may not have access to, at the end of the day, you are always going to be your number one advocate, and not just for your mental health, for your whole life, for the life you want to live and the life you want to lead. And so if you have even 0.001% of a brittle thread that you are hanging onto, hang on to that. Figure out how
Yeah.
to use that thread to the most advantageous positioning you can. And that's what I did.
Yeah. I mean, the old saying is right. You are the only person that you have to go to sleep with and wake up with. So you got to hang
Yes.
on to that person.
Thinking, well, on that note about waking, you're the only person that you wake up with and you go to bed with. It's really fucking hard to wake up with panic and then go to bed with panic and then also be like, oh, all I have is myself. I mean, it's, Rieta, I will tell you, I just recently joined these massive Facebook groups that are geared towards creating containers for, support systems for people's mental health. And it's primarily for people that are experiencing a lot of anxiety and depression. Those are the two, most common. And, it's been so healing, but also so eye-opening to now, like 10 years later, be popping onto these groups for the first time ever, which, by the way, it would have helped me a ton if I would have, accessed community resources much sooner. But now that I'm accessing these online communities, oh my gosh, Rieta, like post after post after post, is people hanging on to their 0.1% brittle thread. And not in this, I mean, yes, we could go down the deep and dark of all of that, but I'm not saying that to shed that, light on that deep darkness, but just to highlight, wow, it's amazing how the cycles of isolation with anxiety can play out. Because once again, for years, I was isolating myself more and more, both socially and in my mind, as an attempt to hang on to that thread. I mean, that doesn't make much sense. And I now see all these people that are popping into these online communities. I can just tell. I can tell from their words. I can tell from how they're carrying their questions and their messaging that they too are in a very similar position. And I am just so driven more than I ever have to speed up that process for people, to get them out of unnecessary psychological suffering as much as possible. Because, hey, life is hard. We all know that. It's going to come with its left turns. It's going to come with its hiccups. It's going to come with its ups and downs. Suffering is an inevitable part of the human experience. But what can we do within our circle of control to remove as much unnecessary suffering? Now, that's a very different conversation. And that's what I'm focused on.
Yeah, I mean, social media gets a lot of slack, but there are a lot of good things about it. And if people can find even the smallest community or the one person or whatever they need, and it's part of the reason I do this podcast, if it helps one person, then we've done our part.
Yeah. Well, you know what? The social media piece, all throughout my 20s, guess what? I had no social media. I have no social media. I didn't have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. So, I'll be honest, I'm a little sad. I'm now that I'm popping into these groups to show up as a support resource, which is amazing. And it's such a privilege and such a blessing. And it's like, I'm just arriving to these groups with like fire under my butt to help people and help people as fast as possible. But I would be lying if I said I wasn't also sad. I mean, there's a part of me that's looking at all these people and I'm like, go you. You're so much, I don't want to say smarter, but I'm just so happy for you that it clicked in your mind to reach out to these online resources. Because for me, I moved so quick and so deep into isolation. I was such a smart gal. I was getting multiple college degrees. I was such a great critical thinker, reading, learning all the time. And not once did it pop into my mind like, oh, is there an online community I could reach out to? I mean, I can now laugh about it, but I'm looking at all these people that are posting on these groups and I'm like, go you. You figured this part out sooner than I did. And I'm so happy for you. Even though you're struggling so much, I am so happy that this part has clicked for you because this will pay off.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I love that you mentioned that you gave your brain like a bubble bath. I think that's a great reference. So, can you elaborate on what you mean by giving your brain a bubble bath?
Yes, I will elaborate more on how on my focus of giving other people's brains a bubble bath, because my process of getting a bubble bath took way longer than what I
Yeah.
want to provide for folks and help promote for folks. But there's so many things I could say about this, but so many people, when they are trying to alleviate their anxiety, clear their anxiety, reduce their anxiety, they start doing what I call the dabblings and doings. It can be a ton of different things and normally ends up being a ton of different things. They start to see a therapist, they start to see a psychiatrist, they get on these medicines, they read these books, they listen to these podcasts, they maybe even join these support groups, they join the yoga class, they do start up Pilates, they I don't know, whatever. The list goes on and on and on. And it's all well intended. Nothing's wrong with that. Matter of fact, it's often very logical. It's rooted in pragmatic, exploration and action step taking, which is all fabulous. But so often people end up going through this process of what I call the brain pain, the brain drain, and then the wallet strain as they start to do these dabblings and doings to get authentic results in reducing their anxiety. But the order of operations of those dabblings and doings, or the balance of those dabbling doings, are not optimized. And so they end up just spending months, years, decades, multiple decades constantly trying to reduce their anxiety and then getting tired of trying to reduce their anxiety. So the whole giving a brain a bubble bath is I use what I have learned from both my experience working with others and then learning from others about what I often position as the most advantageous starting ground for people as they are starting to figure out their next steps for working on, well, I don't like to use the term working on reducing your anxiety, because if you're working on it, it's not getting done, is what I often like to
Mm-hmm.
say. Just like how if you are assigned an essay in school, well, if 8 years later you're going to meet with that professor or that instructor to turn in your essay, then the teacher will be like, "What are you talking about? You were in school 8 years ago." Now, it's never. I'm not saying it's never too late to work on your mental health. So that's not what the analogy was meant to induce. But there's when we get in these dabblings and doing cycles, time goes by. Time goes by. And before we know it, we're just constantly doing a ton of working on our anxiety and not doing anywhere as much clearing of sources of anxiety. And so it ends up causing a ton more brain just stickiness, like this stickiness, this clogging sensation, this stuckness, this fatigue, this grime sensation. And that's where the whole bubble bath comes in. There are ways to approach, understand, and pursue anxiety and the process of reducing your anxiety in a way that is going to feel so much more squeaky clean. And I originally did not do those things. And I know millions of others are not as well. And so I'm on a mission to try to provide that as a container and opportunity for people as soon as possible. And oftentimes that includes primarily working with the subconscious mind. So many therapeutic outlets and modalities is focused on talking to and working on our logic and reflection and introspection, which is really just thinking, which is just really enhancing critical thinking and logic. There's all this attention put towards the body through somatic work, which is great. The mind and the conscious mind and logic, which is also fabulous and needed. But oftentimes, many interventions and therapeutic resources are not addressing the whole body and the whole mind, and that includes the subconscious mind. And often when that is addressed, the process gets sped up tremendously so, and the clearing sensation, that squeaky clean bubble bath sensation, is so much more accessible, because it's like kind of taking like a sponge. And when you just like scrub away at I don't know, residue on a shower wall, or cleaning around the house, there's this feeling that is completely obtainable. But it's interesting when I talk to people about that, because they're so used to stuckness. They're so used to that sticky, like honey residue in their mind and in their body, because they've been doing all the dabblings and doings and doing them for a long time, doing the tryings, tired of trying. So the idea of a more squeaky clean process to reducing their anxiety kind of sounds too good to be true most of the time. But for any of our listeners who experience perpetual anxiety, I'm here to tell you it is so possible, and it is so accessible to you. And I wish it was more accessible to me when I was younger.
Yeah, I'm sure you've experienced the same thing, but whenever you talk to people about the subconscious mind, especially people that have not really studied it, and you tell people, that 95% of our thinking is in our subconscious, that most of the time you get the response of, "No way, no, that can't be true." Like, I remember having that conversation with my mom, and she's like, "There's no way." And I'm like, "Yeah, there is a way."
Yeah, and that's a great comment you made, because one of the things I love doing when I am chatting with folks is highlighting for them right then and there, in the moment, when they're in front of me, when we're talking, all the different things that their body is performing at a subconscious level that they are unaware of, or they've lost mindfulness around, right? And so when you physically see, for example, pulsation in your hand happening involuntarily, well, that's driven by subconscious mind activity. So when you literally get to see it in front of you, it starts to, I should say, it's hard to hide the fact that we have this part of our brain that's operating 24/7, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not, whether we want to admit to it or not. So finding ways to reveal that and explore that and celebrate that with people, it makes it so that it's impossible for them to deny that there's other components and facets of their body that are involved. involved in what they're feeling, involved in what they're experiencing. And that is incredibly revelatory and empowering for many people when they really, really like when that really sinks in and they really get to discover that for the first time. Because going back to my story, it finally takes off the weight of like, oh shit, it's not me, it's not just me. Like the concept of me, my choices, my actions that I did last Thursday or, whatever. It's, I mean, gosh, 20 pounds off the head and heart to realize there's so much more going on. There's so much more going on in the background than just your logic and your thoughts. There really is
Oh,
so
yeah.
much more.
Yeah, absolutely. And because of that, and hopefully you have something for us if not, but do you have any book recommendations or resources in regards that people could maybe start out with to start figuring out their anxiety or the subconscious or any of that?
Yeah, I have a few. My number one favorite resource I love giving to people is the Institute for Rapid Resolution Therapy. And there are two main reasons why I love giving this resource. Number one is financial capacity. And, financial capacity is a concern, hiccup, hurdle for a lot of folks in getting the, not just any mental health services, but effective and fun and joyful and expedient mental health services on top of that. And the Institute for Rapid Resolution Therapy is seriously a 5-star resource for all things personal development and mental health. And they have weekly, not monthly, not yearly, they actually have weekly free events for the public where you can pop on calls and kind of be in the queue for getting services and very top, caliber craft interventions and services. And so I just cannot recommend them enough. And I'm also proud to say that, I'm currently studying under them as well. So of course I'm an advocate for them from many angles.
Love that. It's amazing.
Yes. So that, that's my number one resource. And they are very focused on filling that gap that is so often present in many personal development and mental health spaces, which is targeting all of the human mind. And that does include the subconscious mind. So that is another reason why I really recommend them.
Yeah, I mean, like you already said, it's super important. We can't treat one thing and expect everything else to just fall in line.
Well, I mean, so many people, and maybe you've experienced this in your own life, with anxiety. So many people will go to a therapist, a coach, chatting with their mother at the table, chatting with their best friend over coffee, and they'll be talking about their anxiety. And the support person, whoever that might be, might, try to be talking them through something or an exercise or a train of thought or a mindset to have. And what does the person with anxiety say? They always say, like, yeah, like I get it. Like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, I get it. But, and there's always this like, but, and then the but leads to some comment of, but the truth is, I don't actually feel any different, even with knowing that. I don't actually feel any less anxious. I'm not actually getting any quote better. And that's because their whole mind wasn't being spoken to most of the time, just their logic and consciousness. And that's often not enough to get people to where they want to go.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, absolutely. Um, I, much like you, had anxiety since I was 6, so it was a very long time. It was more social anxiety for me than anything, being in large crowds when I first went to school, eating lunch in the cafeteria with all the students, just loud and crowded and just not not something I enjoyed as a kid, where most kids don't even think about stuff like that. They're like, "Oh, we're going to lunch. This is great."
Yeah. Well, how is your relationship with anxiety today?
My anxiety for the most part is pretty, I mean, it's never, they tell you it never goes away because having anxiety is in some ways good. You need it in certain aspects, right?
Yes, I
But
always
in
say if you want to have no anxiety, you can go get a lobotomy. I
yes,
really do say that to remind people it's part of our natural nervous system makeup. It was never meant to be and we don't want it to go away. Trust me, there will be some big consequences if it actually were to go away, go away.
right.
It's all about changing our relationship to it so we can experience less and less unnecessary symptoms in our day-to-day life. So anyway, going back to you, yes, you knew it
Yes.
wasn't something to quote get rid of. And where did that
Yes.
lead you?
Yes. So I've done a lot of work, especially in the last 5 years, probably the most because I've connected with all sorts of people that talk about mindfulness. My dad was probably the first one, and meditation and reading about the subconscious. I could give book recommendations for days. Dr. Joe Dispenza is probably one of the top leaders of talking about mixing quantum physics with the subconscious mind and making it understandable because, usually you say quantum physics to people and they're like, say less. I don't want to say it's obsolete because, like we talked about, it's not obsolete, but it's definitely well managed and it's definitely not the driver anymore.
Yes. Awesome. How does that feel? Like just, I mean, you kind of took a pause and started to smile, but if you can kind of summarize, how that feels in a few words or sentence, like what adjectives comes to mind?
Oh, it's definitely very freeing for sure.
Yes.
Especially because, as you know, when you have it for so long, it becomes like normal. You're just like, this is just a part of life. I can't go here. I can't go there. Or I can, and I'm going to sit there the whole time, like rubbing my hands or breathing or freaking out or whatever we all have ways we cope with it, coping mechanisms that
Yes.
do help in the moment, but it's not really helping. It's just basically getting you by. So it's nice to go to things and not just be there and get by and not actually enjoy the experience. Because most of the time, that's what I was missing out on. I wasn't actually enjoying the experience. I was getting by and waiting until it was over.
Yes. Yeah. And I often like to say, are we focusing on coping or clearing? Now, really, when you look up the definition of coping, there's, of course, a handful of definitions, just like any word out there, but it essentially just means really a response to something. So we want to respond to our anxiety. So, in and of itself, coping isn't inherently a bad thing, a negative thing, a unwanted thing, or a disadvantageous thing. But if we just take out the word coping and we just replace it with what it really is, with its denotation, it's dictionary definition, it's a response, right? So I love to change the narrative and rhetoric I use with folks and try to get rid of the C word, the coping, and instead have more of a conversation about responding. How is it that we are advantageously positioning ourselves to get an even more advantageous response to anxiety, to then get even more advantageous results, right? So and that's very different than I would like to find effective, coping management strategies for my anxiety. It's when we change the words, it changes the path that we're walking down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
So the
does.
word coping is, oh my gosh, I play with that word. I think about that word. I talk to people about that word all day long. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and I still challenge myself. I like to do like anomalous actions. So I just bought a ticket to a concert. I'm going to go by myself, which is something I've never done before.
Nice.
Um, it's getting comfortable being uncomfortable because in the long run, I know it's going to be more fun than it is going to be anything else. But that's, we get stuck. We get stuck, which goes back to our subconscious of just being comfortable doing things that we do every single day. Most of us do the same thing every day. We get up, we brush our teeth, we go to the bathroom, we make our bed, we have coffee. And like, that's all basically subconscious because we're programmed to do that. You have to change
Hmm.
it.
Yeah. And sometimes, and this is something I've had to remind myself too, because I also did go to concerts by myself a handful of times and I wanted to be there. Of course I wanted to be there, but it was uncomfortable, and I went there knowing like, okay, this is me getting comfortable with uncomfortable. But also sometimes I have to remind myself that sometimes it's not about getting comfortable with uncomfortable. Sometimes it's just about getting uh, less discomforted within discomfort, and that is a form of being comfortable with uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's so this goes back to the whole, how can we constantly be positioning ourselves for a more advantageous response cycle, result cycle, and experience with whatever it is we're playing with our life, our mental health. And 1% better is 1% better. 5% better is 5% better. 75% better is 75% better. But just
Yeah.
being aware of, is this the most advantageous word I could use? Is this the most advantageous action? Is this the most advantageous approach and understanding of what I'm doing? And just always kind of putting yourself in that curiosity seat, I find to be an absolute game changer, in particular for people that are really looking to reduce their anxiety.
Yeah. It also
Yeah.
changes the narrative if I think I'm going to this concert and I'm going to make a bunch of friends. That's a totally different narrative than going, I'm going to go there and I'm going to be by myself and what's going to happen and I'm not going to be okay. And it's just, instead of going down, like you said earlier, that dark path, it's, I'm going to go and I'm going to have fun and I'm going to make friends with all these people. And who knows what else is going to happen.
Yeah. Who knows what else is going to happen? That is a more advantageous like train of thought and response of like, oh, I'm going here and I'm going to see what happens. Like the response is curiosity. So when the unknown emerges, your response still is curiosity. The concert doesn't go well, your response can be curiosity. You didn't really end up having fun. Your response can be curiosity. Oh, you have an anxiety attack in the bathroom at the concert. Oh, well, your response can be curiosity. And actually, going back to you asked about resources. Oh, perfect. I have it there. The book Unwinding Anxiety. And let me just lean over to get it. Unwinding Judson Brewer. That is the name of the author. I knew it was a J and a B was on the top of my mind. Unwinding Anxiety is a fabulous book because it was one of the first books, if not the only book that I'm aware of that's on the market, really discussing how anxiety can become a habit, which is not something that is really discussed and talked about to the degree that this thought leader and scientist Judson Brewer discusses. And so that is a great book.
I love a good book recommendation. So there we go. We got our good book recommendation. Perfect. And so this all led this whole amazing journey. Amazing, you can say now. I know later, I knew earlier on, you
Mm-hmm.
probably wouldn't say it was amazing, but led to you creating Actionable Anxiety. So talk to us about that.
Yeah, so Actionable Anxiety is my private coaching practice. The name Actionable was Actionable Anxiety was derived from a few different places of influence. One of them being that most people that experience not just anxiety, but really folks that experience perpetual, prolonged, persistent anxiety feel completely stuck. They feel completely paralyzed. They start to get into these helplessness and hopelessness cycles, constantly just not knowing their next steps. Once again, they've done all the tryings and doings, and now they're tired of trying, right? So there's all this stagnation, all this energy of stagnation. And I have found through both my personal and professional experience that so often where the beginning of stagnation comes from is not because of their long history, trying to reduce their anxiety. It's from the very starting line of that history. And it often starts with how, from the very beginning, were they understanding anxiety? How were they approaching the concept and the experience of anxiety? How were they reading it? What were their initial responses to it? The kind of the conceptualization of the topic in and of itself. Maybe they had their therapist talk to them, and say, oh, it sounds like you might be experiencing some anxiety. But from that moment onward, how was they perceiving that experience or that topic? And so often from the very beginning of the starting line, I have found that people are not starting off on the most advantageous footing for beginning their journey to develop a more useful and proactive relationship with anxiety and to therefore reduce their anxiety symptoms. And what it ends up being is so many years of this like stagnant, stuck, paralyzed energy. And so oftentimes people are thinking anxiety is like the least actionable thing. And now knowing what I know, and now knowing what I wish I used to have known many, many years ago, I now know full-heartedly that when anxiety comes knocking on the door, it is the exact opposite of a source of stagnation or paralyzation. If you just have an advantageous understanding of what anxiety is, what it's like in your body, why it's showing up, why it's continuing to show up. And oh my gosh, your process from there is just going to be so much more of a breeze. It's going to be
Yeah.
so much more easeful. So, and you're going to be taking actions that are building the life you want to live and lead out. And sorry, Rieta, I just realized you were just asking about, oh, what is actionable anxiety? But see, I got so stuck on the passion of just even the word of actionable. And I think I started to go off on that because once again, Rieta, this morning I spent 2 hours on these large, massive Facebook groups. I'm talking, they have, over 80,000 people in them that are just posting every 5 seconds about, please help me. I'm really suffering with my anxiety. What do I do? I'm taking this medication. What about this? And post after post after post, you can just see how unactionable they're perceiving anxiety to really be. And it breaks my heart. And I'm also on a mission to change that. And it's not just, it's to change it for myself too. I mean, I've now that I really realize this, I still have to, I mean, I'm human. I still have to remind myself this. Occasionally anxiety still comes knocking on my door as an anxiety coach. I actually had a racing heart earlier this morning, and I responded so much more advantageously to my anxiety, and I got results that I wanted. I got them instantly, and I got to move on with my day. 10 years ago, that would have sent me into psychiatric unrest. So, and the only difference between myself today and myself 10 years ago is how I was responding and building a relationship with anxiety. That is the only thing that is different. My diet is the same. My blood work levels are the same. My environment's the same. Having a loving, family support, all of that's the same. The only thing that's different is my relationship with anxiety.
Yeah. And I can't remember who I saw talk about it, but that also relates to changing how you define things. The certain way we define things, if you give it a negative definition, but then you decide to change it, it will change how you perceive that word. And you can do the same thing with anxiety. Anxiety has such a negative definition, right? But we can change it.
Yeah. And emphasis on the word perceive. A conversation I was having with someone earlier this morning, we were talking about how we were both in shock that throughout our own personal histories and journeys with seeing various different support resources, mental health practitioners, psychiatrists, therapists, you name it, we were both, even though we were two totally different people, very different backgrounds of life, very different, histories all around, we both had the same experience where we were in shock that never once did we have any of these professional support resources sit us down and look us in the eye and say, what does anxiety feel like for you? And how are you perceiving those sensations? How are you perceiving the thing that is happening inside of your body? And hey, here's a revelatory idea. How about we start there? No one did that for me. No one did that for him. And unfortunately, we're still where we're at with where we're at. And it is a very, very common circumstance for people that are tiptoeing into my world. That is 100% the case. Whether they've seen one support resource or they've seen 15, most of them have never been asked, hey, what is anxiety really like for you? How are you perceiving that? And what has that done for you? What has that gotten you in terms of results? So that is where I start with everyone that comes into my world, because that's positioning us to start off on the start or on the strongest starting line, I feel.
Yeah. So going off of that, what do you think we can do to continue to raise the bar in the mental health industry?
Yeah, there's many things, but one of them is going back to, I'm going to choose this, the subconscious mind conversation we were having, a few minutes ago. There are different ways to speak to the subconscious mind. When you were having a conversation with a patient, a client, a girlfriend over coffee, a family member that's struggling in the living room, when you are talking to another human being, there is so much opportunity that is immediately available for you to access more of that other human's mind. And you do not have to be trained in years deep of certifications and things like hypnotherapy, for example, to achieve an effect on someone's subconscious mind. And so one of the gaps that I see in and not just the quote mental health industry, but also many other people changing industries, including coaches and anyone that's out there trying to help another human directly better their lives, better their mental health, better their life design. Using things like, this is so simple. It's so simple, but it's shocking how often it's not done. Using things like analogies and metaphors and symbols that speaks more to the subconscious mind. And you don't need 10 years of hypnotherapy training to start to do that. I mean, Rieta, how often have you experienced in your life you're chatting with someone about anything, doesn't matter, and someone's like, "Oh yeah, this thing I've been experiencing is just like this," or they drop some kind of really polished, like pungent, to the point metaphor that you're like, "Oh, that's good. Like, yes, I know exactly what you mean. Oh my gosh." And you immediately respond. And you don't just respond, but like all of you
Mm-hmm.
responds. You lean into the person more because they hit all the parts of your brain and they hit them all at the right exact moment, and it harmonized things, and it created this like sensation. There is so much more opportunity in how we're having conversations with folks to get to moments like that, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated. And you don't have to go back to school for 15 years and get a whole new set of degrees in order to do that with someone. We just have to be more intentional in the craft and caliber of the conversations we're having, and in particular, in private therapeutic spaces when people are coming to us and investing into our services to get them results. And I will speak that till my face turns blue.
Well, then, speaking of saying important things, what would you say to yourself, 10 years ago when you were in the height of your panic, or we'll make it a twofold, to somebody who maybe currently is there? What would you say to somebody right now?
I would say, if you have not considered, oh my gosh, I'm trying not to tear up actually thinking about what I would say to my younger self. I would say many things. I would say, if you are starting to isolate, and remember, isolate doesn't just mean socially isolate, that can mean you're doing excessive introspection in your mind all the time, trying to quietly solve your problem, your issue, whatever's going on for you. You're trying to solve it before you reveal, anything to anyone. Uh, don't. I applaud you, and I've been in those shoes, but it will lightly stagnate your growth and your development and getting to healing uh, for much longer than needs to be. So move away from isolation if possible. I would also say, if you were not aware about this thing called the subconscious mind and how it processes data, well, guess what? If you're hearing this for the first time on, Rita and I's conversation, then you're already ahead of the game, because it took me many years to really learn about this. And so if you're hearing it now, start today. There's lots of resources, people you can go see, and not just me. There's tons of other practitioners out there that are learning skill sets to better speak to all of the human mind. So there's people, there's books, there's resources. Go out and explore. And I would say, if you have not been responding in ways that you feel are really advantageous in getting you to where you want to go, then each new second is a new opportunity to pivot, to change, to experiment. And there's so much richness and opportunity to change your psychology, change your mental health. And it is so available to you. And I know if you're deep in anxiety, it feels so not available, but I am here to tell you it is so available. If you are even listening to this and you're hiding under a dark bed with a blanket over your head and you're shaking with anxiety, it is still available to you.
Great reminder. I think we all need to hear that. And anxious or not, just the
Yes.
idea that there are resources, you're not alone. There are things that can be done. It's not over.
It's not over. It's not over. And honestly, here's the best part. Most of the time when you think it's over, it's actually just beginning. Like, the goodness is really just beginning. And that's part of why, when I'm seeing all these thousands of people in these Facebook groups just in complete despair and hopelessness, I am sad, and I'm also so excited, because the gift is coming. They just haven't gotten to unwrap it yet. And I would have never believed that when I was in my deepest years of suffering. I would have never believed that, but my gosh, it is so true. It is so true.
And that is a perfect place to end, unless you have any final tidbits to leave with my listeners.
No, I think they've heard enough from me.
Mac gave you everything, y'all. So thank you so, so much for being here, Coach Mac.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for letting me tiptoe into your world.
And this is how to deal when the shit gets real, guys. I'll see you all next episode.